Well, I just recorded 20 minutes of talking about Poland, and it didn't record. So I'm going to try to do it all over. I did a testing thing before I hit the button here. Anyway, I was talking about Poland because the two topics, Poland and Reformation. I'm just able to really speak about Poland. Reformation is just a whole other kettle of fish, and I want to be pretty careful of what I say there. Before I get half the world looking to lope my head off. But so this week, I got up early this morning. By the way, I played a little piano, and I started off with playing some Chopin because he's probably the number one proponent of music in coming out of Poland. And during the week, I had listened to, with Poland in mind, I had listened to this LP I have. It's a young man, Garrick Olson, who in 1970 went to Warsaw and won, first American winner of the Chopin International Piano Competition, which is a big deal. Possibly second only to the Tchaikovsky competition for the piano that takes place in, I think in Moscow, Russian kind of promoted. And that's a big deal. And another American, Van Cliburn, as we probably all know, everybody knows this, he took it in about 1958 or something like that. And he brought the house down, as they said when he did. This is Tchaikovsky. And the Russian people, just from that moment on, adored him. He would go back, and they were in the streets trying to listen to him. He was wonderful, a wonderful man. And this young man, Garrick, also impressed the Polish people quite a bit, and everybody was looking for him. Eugene Ormandy of the Philadelphia wanted him after that. He quite and playing on his record is just unbelievable. By the way, he played the Chopin Piano Concerto No. 1 in E minor. Just wonderful passages in that. So anyway, one of the things they do say in there, and they say elsewhere, is that Chopin was looking for the folk music of Poland. Well, I don't see that. His music is too filled with finesse, too filled with I want to call it just stuff that's beyond folky. And but they also, and like I say, I don't see that. I see that in classical composers like Bartok, Stravinsky, Enescu, and others. Definitely others. There's plenty of them that they went looking for their national heritage. I think Dvorak's another one. Dvorak was real good. He came to America in the late 19th century, and he wrote our folk music, the American String Quartet. Beautiful piece. If you like bluegrass music, but you would like to hear sophisticated bluegrass music, go listen to Dvorak's American String Quartet. Now, and let me tell you, I also believe that this is very much part of world history, because world history is the cultures, what people are doing, so on and so forth. But anyway, to get back to Poland, went to the library, only got one book because that's all they had on Poland. But they're unique books, and they're put out by a company called Hypernicus or something books. Hypocrene books. Hippocrene or something like that. Hippocrene books. This one's on Poland, but they got them on many other countries. The author of this one is Iwo Cyprian Pogonaski, Poland, an illustrated history. And so much information in there, and it's really a matter of information. You're not really going to get comprehension, by reading this, but you will get an idea of what was going on. So my idea of what was going on for many centuries. He gives a brief introduction to Slavic people coming into the area, 750 BC, living in a primitive fashion that people in those times lived. Their living quarters were basically mud and dirt and wood structures, fortified with a palisade around where the people were living. Somewhat reminds me of the way Native Americans lived in some areas of this country, in their longhouses and palisades around the longhouses and so on. But so they're there, 750 BC, and he takes you through quickly, very quickly, to 750 AC, where they're starting to coalesce as a larger group, rather than little bands of people, a larger group. And probably about that time, they start taking on a name of the Poland, something that sounds like Poland, Polynese people, something like Polynese people. And but by 750, they start kicking up a storm, and they start headed off into what I see as a totally different direction than the rest of Europe. That direction took them towards a semblance of democracy. The rest of Europe, and probably the rest of the world, were headed towards absolutism. So on the one hand, you had Poland, who was trying to make everybody feel comfortable in their place in the world, whether they were the upper aristocrats or whether they were minor aristocrats and nobles and this and that, or they were the people, the tradesmen, what have you. And so they wrote laws and they codified laws and they had a parliament. They did all these things that were headed towards democracy. The other countries were all absolutism, which means they had a big king or maybe they had a big duke, and what he said is what you did, or what she said is what you did. Absolutism. And that went on forever. So it dawned on me that in 1492, we had these absolute type monarchs, Isabel and Ferdinand, gathering around them these dreamers and adventurers and sending them off into the unknown to go find riches for them. The Spice Islands, and if you could get me some gold and emeralds, that'd be nice too. And shortly thereafter, England got a whiff of this and they started doing it too. All the absolutisms did it. So the point that follows is that the New World then is a child of absolutism. It's not a child of Poland and democratic tendencies. It's a child of absolute tendencies. Now, you would say that, all these countries, modern countries, are all democracies, most of them. They are, but they welled up from absolutism, which I believe makes them a different sort of fish than what Poland was and what Poland has always seemed to be. They just always seem to be fighting for freedom and democracy. You know, until the breath was kicked out of them by Russia and Germany in the latter 19th century, and so decreed by those monsters that you're not even a country anymore. Listen, the world would have been a totally different place if certain things didn't happen in the 1700s, and Poland would have been the major driving force. First of all, they were very successful in trade. They were very successful in intellectual pursuits. They had more colleges than you could shake a stick at. They had access to these institutions of learning from people without a lot of money could get into these institutions. They could get their kids in there, and the kids could become a fairly well-placed cleric, in other words, a religious type, or well-placed bureaucrat, and they had ideals of righteous living and just, fairness, and so on and so forth. And just not true of absolutism, just isn't. So, and I'm very glad to read about Poland because it just seems to me to be, not somebody or something that I have to swallow that they're being absolute monarchs while some good things are happening. You got to get rid of that absolutism, and they don't do it. They stay with that, and then they look about how wonderful they are as they subdue India. So, or Africa, just put their boot on them. Anyway, Poland is going in that direction. The rest of the world is going in this direction. If you look at the maps, they change radically over the period that I'm reading about. From 1250 to 1750, the configuration of that part of Europe changes radically. But for the most part, Poland, whatever its configuration is looking at the time, they're pretty much usually the main force of civilization in that part of Europe, if not all of Europe. All of Europe, because they are doing things right. They're doing things well. And people want to align themselves with Poland because they're successful. Okay? And at this time, though, we see, if we haven't seen it before, we see it probably starting to be exaggerated now, is the push-take, this is my word, push-take theory of geopolitics. You push and you take. You push and you take. And that was going on big time for something they called the German tribes or something like that. And they would do that a lot. And at the time, Prussia really wasn't as aligned with those people. So Prussia was getting a lot of this push-take until eventually they get absorbed by Germany. Poland was getting the business from that side, which was Poland's western side. And eventually they would get the push-take from Russia. Russia does a good push-take into what looks like on a map, what is today Finland. It could be something Novgorod or something like that. And it goes there, takes them all over. And for the rebellious types, they took 10,000 of them and transplanted them, deported them to the Urals, which is 2,000 miles away. So I'm sure those folks were very happy. And of course, Russia continued with that, on that line of deportation, and which was their MO. They take over, then deport everybody. Take over, then deport, and get rid of them, make them prisoners, so on. So we have a situation where if things would have went another way, maybe this whole world would be less antagonistic and less belligerent than it is today, because the wrong people got the powers. I know in the first take of this little talk this morning, I talked about other things. I've already lost them, whatever they were. But, I talked about Copernicus, because in this time frame, about 1540s or so, he came up with the theory. See, he was a professor in a college, I think in Krakow, whatever you pronounce it. I think that's where he was doing his learning and studying, and he came up with the plan of the universe and our particular solar system, with the planets going around the sun and the Earth having a daily rotation. He came up with that, and I'll criticize that though. His drawing is of that shows everything in a perfect sphere. The little sun sphere, and then all the planets and spheres around it, which we know is not true. You go around in elliptics or something like that. Well, and then we say, okay, we all heard about Copernicus. And actually his last name, I think in Polish, is almost identical with that football player, Kopernik or something, who's having the issue outside of football. Copernic or something. And you look at the spelling, they're both the same, but we don't spell Copernicus like that anymore. We anglicize it and spell it the way we spell it. But to go on, we hear about him, and then you don't hear anything else. You hear that he had a little trouble with the Pope. Eventually, the Protestants wanted nothing to do with his book when it came out, whatever it was, which one. It talked about these things. They, of course, burned it, so to speak. That you couldn't. This was the Lutherans and the Calvinists, whatever they are, and they that's it. You can't heresy. You can't even find it. You're dead if you read it. So, but the Pope, probably hedging his bets, says, well, this might be something here. So he let it go on for a number of years until finally even he made it on do not read list. So do not read until 18 something, maybe 1870. Then you're allowed to read it. So, but we say, well, what happened to this guy? Is that what he did? He looked through his telescope one day. He wrote down some notes, and that was his life. No, this guy was all over the map, from a statesman, a politician, the scientist, the educator, all these things. And one thing I found interesting about his life was that, because it fits so to this time, there was an epidemic in Poland, and he was being the top administrator of some department that this would fall under. He studied the problem, and he figured out that somehow bread and the distribution of bread were the cause for this epidemic, and his solution. This is why we want to have great thinking men in our world, which unfortunately I don't think we have a lot of them anymore. But to have this man look at the problem and say, I know what we're going to do. We're going to cover every loaf of bread coming out of the bakery in butter. And when it arrives at its destination, if it's been contaminated, we'll know because the butter will show the contamination. And then we can either get rid of that, or probably that's what we'll do. We won't use that loaf of bread. And he solved the epidemic. Done. Maybe we could call him back from the dead today and have him take a look at our own problems. But so I'm probably going to bring this discussion today to a close. I'm trying to go over in my mind if I forgot anything. I don't think so. Probably whatever it is, we could talk about it next time. I also said in the other one, and I didn't say it now. I'm very, very pleased that this little book uses frequently the term ordinary people. So he too, this author, sees the distribution of people as a great many of them simply being ordinary, like most of us. And isn't that a good thing? Okay, with that, I'll say bye. Have a good weekend, and see you next time on Bluebird Semaphore.